News from yesterday's lecture. So those of you that missed, good job. I thought it was a pretty good lecture. Reviewed it a little bit this morning. So actually, we got 2 slides to go. Yeah, we did this, but I kind of went the whole hour on those 2 slides because I threw in some modern stuff with it that's relevant to today. We talked a little bit about politics today. And the Electoral College a little bit today, and the House and the Senate. And I know you're kind of at a disadvantage because you haven't had government yet. So I'll just kind of bring in a little bit on a couple different things, and we'll wrap up this section, okay? And remind, at the end of the hour, I'll hand out a review sheet for you. Tomorrow will be a review day, and take tests on Monday. Cool? Did you guys see your old test? Yep.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure I did that. I'd like you to see your test before. Okay. We did this one too.
Yeah.
Okay. We have not done this one. Okay. Now, those of you that are taking notes, do not panic. This is going to be up here for a while. Okay. So make sure you're listening as well as writing. Okay, so what we see in 1936 is what's called an electoral landslide. Roosevelt wins big, right? Landon only wins 2 states, doesn't even win his home state of Kansas, right? So, guys, let me introduce you to a new political term. This spring, many of you will attend your senior prom. Congratulations. Okay, I went to 3. All right. Well, junior year, senior year, and then I came back and was a date for a friend that didn't. So, which is always awkward. Yeah. But anyhow, well, it is awkward to be a freshman in college and come back to a senior. It's just a little weird. But anyhow, some of the gentlemen will rent tuxes. Okay, and some may even choose to wear a tux with tails. Okay, that is a thing, right?
Please do that, please.
Okay, so in presidential politics, when a president wins in a landslide, oftentimes that president will have coattails, basically bringing in members of Congress of his party with him. I was going to say his or her, we're not there yet, okay? But with his or her party with them, okay, because they're so popular. So if you're voting for Roosevelt, who's a Democrat, well, I'm just going to vote for the Democrats running for Congress as well. Does that make sense? So the president has coattails, okay? Now, when you are a voter and you vote for different parties in the same election, you're called a split ticket voter, okay? When you vote for everybody in the same party, you're a party line voter. Does that make sense? Okay. So Roosevelt had won a lot of new friends with the New Deal. Okay. Catch that? It was a Freudian slip. If you weren't paying attention, never mind. Okay, so what we start to see, guys, is larger, like blocks of people that really become part of what's called the base of the Democratic Party. Okay, groups of people that will continue to vote for the Democratic Party, really stretching forward for many years. Okay, so urban areas, cities tend to vote heavily Democratic. Okay, farmers will vote Democratic. Laborers, these are blue-collar workers, manufacturing workers, factory workers, teachers, social workers, immigrants, and African Americans. And you can add to this list, if you're taking notes, Catholics. So chances are, if your great-grandparents and grandparents were Catholic, chances are they were probably Democrats. Okay, because if you think about the social justice teaching of the church, okay, and you see what Roosevelt is doing here, trying to help the poor, those that are suffering through the New Deal programs, you might see a natural tendency for Catholics to move in that direction. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you look at Catholics today and their voting behavior, do you guys know, like, which party Catholics tend to vote for more than another?
Well, in this area,
Oh, this area, yeah.
West Wichita.
But there's Catholics all over the country, right? So here's the general rule, guys. If you are a practicing Catholic, you go to Mass every week, chances are you're going to tend to be more of a Republican, okay? In fact, religiously, the more religious you are, the more Republican you tend to be. Whether it's, Protestants, Catholics, so forth, okay? Now, are there exceptions to this? Are there deeply devout Catholics and Christians that vote for the Democrats? Absolutely. Okay, one of my best friend, Mr. O'Connor, his sister is a nun, and she's one of the most liberal people you'll ever meet, he said. So, yeah, of course, there's exceptions to this. In the last election, Catholics were about 50-50. Okay? Yeah.
Do you know, like, why?
Mostly over abortion, social issues, gay marriage, these sorts of things. Now, some people vote with their pocketbook. Some people vote on those types of issues like abortion, right? Which tend to be very important to some Catholics, okay? Let's talk about African Americans here for a second, okay? Now, this is the first time the Democrats will control both houses of Congress since the Civil War. As you guys know, the North had more people than the South. Yes? Okay, so when the Civil War was over, the Republicans dominated Congress because there were more states to begin with and more people. So let's talk about what Congress is, because some of you, I don't know what you know, okay? So you have the United States Senate, okay, which is, there's 100, okay? So if there's more northern states, probably gonna have more Republicans in the Senate, yes? There's 2 from each state, okay? And then in the House of Representatives, there are 435 members, and those are divided up by population based on the population of your state, okay? So if we come back here, and guys, this is a great map. What these numbers show are electoral college votes. Kansas has 6 electoral college votes, okay? If you subtract 2 from this number, you get 4. That's how many members of the House we have. So how many members of the House does California have? Based on their population, they're the largest state. Do you follow me? Texas has 36 members of the House. And they draw 36 districts in the state of Texas, and then Republicans and Democrats will run against each other. Yes? Okay? So, because the South had fewer people, they had fewer seats in the House. Now, remember how the South was dominated by the Democratic Party? Yes, after the Civil War, before the Civil War, after the Civil War, all the way up until about 1988 to 94 is when the South began to switch red to Republican. Follow me? Okay. Now, so if you're an African American, which party is the party of the KKK? The Democratic Party. Which party is the party of Jim Crow? Democrats. But in 1936, African Americans majority vote for Democrats. This is why they're voting for Democrats. In 1936. What is Roosevelt doing? He's providing help to African Americans with jobs. Okay? Whether it be with the PWA, the WPA, the CCC, what have you, right? And he's also setting up things like, the dole and welfare programs and things that help people. So the African Americans moved to the Democratic Party and haven't left. Okay? Follow me here. Okay? Now, when we talk about Trump, okay, well, let me just talk about modern politics. So if you look at this list of people today, okay, and we talked about Catholics, kind of about split, okay, which one of these groups, if you were to say one of these were not so democratic anymore, which one would it be? Yeah, the farmers, okay? Now, they're split too, but most vote Republican, okay? Now, that being said, I had a student second hour that brought this up because I don't know if you guys remember talking about this. When Trump ran in 2016, he won states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan for the first, some of Pennsylvania for the first time in decades for a Republican president. Okay, your blue collar workers. Okay, they shifted towards Trump. These are your lower educated, blue collar labor people. Okay. Some of these could be union members. Some of them may not be. Okay, because unions, tend to represent blue collar workers in a lot of areas. Okay, and so it's going to be interesting to see what happens in 2024. Okay, I don't know if Trump's going to run. Okay, but what we have before that election in 2022 is called a midterm election. Okay, these are very important. Right now, the Senate is 50-50. So you have 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. The vice president is a Democrat. She, Kamala Harris, is the president of the Senate. She breaks tie votes. So the Democrats have control of the Senate. Okay? In the House, the Democrats have an 8-seat margin out of 435. Now, in 2022, 1/3 of the Senate will be up for re-election. We only vote 1/3 of the Senate at a time over 6 years. Their terms are 6 years. Their terms are 2 years. So in 2022, all 435 are up for re-election every 2 years. So this is a midterm, okay, or a non-presidential election. Every even-numbered year, we have these. Following? Yeah. So, Roosevelt has coattails, brings in the Democrats, okay? So this is going to be valuable information on the next slide, okay? All right, so I'm going to move away from this for a second, talk about what's next, and we'll come back to the politics here in a second, okay? Roosevelt, the first radio president. Obviously, Hoover had access to the radio, as did Coolidge, but Roosevelt really used the media here. Okay, he learned how to use it. Okay, so he talked to the American people as if they were his friends. Those that knew he was paralyzed, saw it as a source of empathy. Seeing him as a genuine human being. Talked in a simple language, didn't talk over their head. Okay. Where everybody could understand. Okay. Now, to show you an example of just how close Roosevelt was with the media, here's a perfect example. In 4 years, Hoover gave 66 press conferences. In his first 4 years, Roosevelt gave 337. Which is like one almost every 4 days. And this is like one every month. Close, not exact, but close. You see what I'm saying? Now, have you been paying attention to, has Joe Biden been doing many press conferences? Have you noticed if you just watch a couple of them, Joe Biden has a list of reporters to call on that's given to him by his staff. Okay. Now, are these reporters giving Biden the question before they ask it? I don't know. Okay, but he has a list of reporters to call on. Okay, he said it himself. It's on my list. Oh, I'm not supposed to call on you. Okay. Now, if you're going to get asked tough questions, do you want to put yourself through that? No. Hoover, about 8 months into his presidency, the stock market crashed. Okay, and then we slid into depression. So if he holds a press conference, they're going to be like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing to help? Right? And so Hoover didn't like putting himself through that. So he didn't. There's no rule that you have to do press conferences. Okay? Has Biden had much good news to talk about lately? Afghanistan? Inflation? COVID? Not really. So he doesn't really want to put himself through that, and he doesn't have to. Okay? Bush didn't give a lot of press conferences. Okay? Trump kind of manipulated the media, and this is how he would do a lot of press things. He would do, like, before he was getting on Air Force One, or Air Force Two, the helicopter, which was noisy in the background, okay? And all the cameras would be pointed on him. Not, you couldn't really see the media. They were standing over here. He's standing over in front of the helicopter, and he would take questions from the media there. That's how he did a lot of press conferences. They weren't very long. Some of them lasted a few minutes. Some of them lasted, a little bit longer than that. But Roosevelt was constantly with the media. Okay, so generally what kind of questions he got were what we call these. Softball questions. Okay. Now this isn't fast pitch softball. This is slow pitch softball. Here's a good question. Hit it out of the park. Nice and easy for you. Here you go. Okay. Softball question. Okay. And Roosevelt got a lot of that, as does Biden. Okay. There could be some, if he were to hold a press conference today, if you were watching your country the last 2 days, the Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, General Miley, was testifying 2 days ago in front of the Senate and yesterday in front of the House. Alongside him was the Secretary of Defense and the head of the Marine Corps. And they were asking them about what the hell happened in Afghanistan. Okay? The generals did not want to throw Biden under the bus. But by telling the truth and being under oath, they kind of threw Biden under the bus. The generals were recommending leaving 2,500 troops in Afghanistan to protect the getting out, the removal of Americans and Afghans that were supposed to get out with us. Biden ignored that advice and pulled all the troops out. The Taliban asked the Marine Corps general, he said, as we were pulling out of our Air Force bases, Bagram Air Force bases, and others, and falling back to Kabul, the Taliban asked our generals, do you want to just secure Kabul and hold that so you can get everybody out? And they said, well, we don't have enough troops to do that because Biden pulled all the troops out. So they fell back to the airport. And then they had to send in more people to secure the airport and then try and get people out. Okay. So it was a debacle. Okay. Joe Biden doesn't want to answer those questions today. He will not likely be holding a press conference after what just happened in Congress the last 2 days. Okay. So this just kind of shows you the relationship. And if you're good at the media, you're good at doing that. I mean, how did Donald Trump become president? You know what happened to news ratings when Trump ran for president? Oh, they went through the roof. People were watching the news. There was a soundbite from Trump that everybody wanted to talk about every night. Some people wanted to bash him on his soundbite, and some people wanted to analyze the soundbite. Some people wanted to praise the soundbite. But guys, you look at media ratings during the Trump era, through the roof. All those people that hated Trump were watching CNN and MSNBC. Since Trump has been gone, you should see CNN's ratings. I mean, they have fallen off, like by hundreds of thousands of viewers a day, because they're not talking about Trump. So he was a boom for the media. Because he was the lightning rod in the room. Everybody wanted to talk about it. And so the news media had a field day with it. Okay. Okay. All right. So this was one of your homework questions. Roosevelt recession. So this is a little bit difficult to understand, I guess. During the Depression, things had started to get better, right? By 1936, we saw the numbers. Unemployment was down. Farm income was up. Production was up. Yes, things were improving. But then they strike down the AAA, they strike down the NRA, they strike down this, they strike down that, and the economy starts to shrink. That's called a recession. Okay? To define a recession, guys, there's 4 quarters in a year. Okay? If you have 3 quarters of negative growth in the economy, which means the economy is shrinking rather than growing, that is the definition of a recession. Okay? I don't know if there's a true definition of depression, like how many quarters of negative growth or what percentage that's supposed to be. But I've heard this said before. I may have shared this with you before. A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. Depression, when you lose your job. Okay. So you guys remember this, the attack on the Supreme Court. So yeah, under the recession, unemployment's going to start going back up. Negative growth in the economy, a slowdown, okay, during the Depression. You had the court packing scheme, the switch in time saves 9. And then Roosevelt's going to do something that does not turn out well for the Democratic Party. So let me show you this, okay? I've been talking about these things, mentioning these infrastructure bills in Congress, yes? Okay, now we get a chance to talk about them a little bit, okay? All right, so let me use this to explain this. So Roosevelt wants to purge, that means get rid of, conservative Democrats from his party. Okay, so can you see this political spectrum here? You got moderates in the middle, okay? Democrats to the left, liberals, socialists, communists, right? To the right, you get Republicans. Conservatives, reactionary, fascists, whatever, okay? Now, you talk, who are conservative Democrats? That's these people. And here. Does that make sense? Okay. So Roosevelt wants, instead of these conservative Democrats to win these 435 seats, he wants more liberal Democrats to win. The ones out here, the progressives. Okay? Now, when we have, prior to the 2022 election, which is in November, right? Okay, so let's say we live in the 4th district of Kansas. Okay, let me show you that. Oh, that's a bad Kansas. Yeah, it is. Thank you. This is the big one. Okay. This is the 4, this is the 3, this is the 2. Okay? Republican, 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 Democrat. Okay? City, urban area, Kansas City area. Okay? Now, each one of these districts has roughly 800,000 people in it. Okay? 787,000, something like that. Okay? So we have roughly 3 million people living in Kansas. Okay? So for this seat here, okay, Ron Estes is our representative. Okay. Now over here, the Democrat is Sharice David. Okay. Now, let's say in February and March of 2022, you may have another Republican challenge for that seat. Like say, you know what? I'm going to run. I'm running for the House. I'm going to challenge Estes for the Republican nomination. Okay, so you could have, 3 Republicans run for that one Republican spot. You could have 3 or 5 or 6 Democrats run for the one spot. So they will hold an election here to choose. This is called a primary election. This will take place before the November elections, and the Republicans will have one nominee and the Democrats will have one nominee, and they will run against each other in November. Follow me? So these are primary elections where parties choose the nominee. You guys follow me? Okay, now, so Roosevelt wants to get rid of the conservative Democrats and run liberal Democrats against them. Yes? The problem is here that people don't like radical ideas. The vast majority of Americans don't like, most Americans are in here. They don't like this crap out here. They don't like this crap out here. Now, would you consider Kansas to be a red state or a blue state? It's a red state. What color is our governor? Blue. And here's why. In 2018, the Republicans nominated, we had like 5 or 6 Republicans, 7, 8 running for governor. We had to choose one to run against the Democrat. Yes? And the Republican Party chose Chris Kobach. How many of you guys know who Chris Kobach is? Okay, Chris Kobach is over here. Now, most Republicans agree with Chris Kobach on many of his stances. But Chris Kobach, when you listen to him and you watch him, he kind of leaves you with this kind of like creepy feeling about him. You're like, yeah, I get his message. Yeah, I agree with that. But this guy, I don't know. Something about him's off. I don't trust him. So a lot of Republicans in the state of Kansas did this. They held their nose and they voted for Laura Kelly. What's that?
We should watch
One of his ads? Okay. Well, you guys can YouTube that. But yeah. Okay, so listen. When we had the Senate seat open, right? Roger Marshall was running. Chris Kobach was running. There were other Republicans running, right? And the Republicans in the state of Kansas learned their lesson, and they nominated Marshall, who's not as far out here as Kobach. And Republicans voted for him because there's more Republicans in Kansas than there are Democrats. And he won. Follow me? Yeah.
How can you have a conservative Democrat if they're on 2 different sides?
That's a good question. It's just that they're more of a moderate Democrat, conservative Democrat, more leaning to the middle.
So, okay.
And there's not very many of them. Let me talk about 2 of them right now because you bring up a good question. Okay, over here in the Senate, 50-50. You've got 2 moderate or conservative Democrats that are holding up this, okay? So let me explain what's going on today in the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi is trying to figure out if she's going to hold a vote on this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, okay? She needs a majority of votes to win, okay? She is actually going to get some votes from Republicans on this. These Republicans will not vote for this. You follow me? Now, this is mostly legitimate infrastructure. Rebuilding roads, rebuilding bridges, tunnels, dams, water treatment facilities, all this sort of infrastructure. And I think it's probably a good idea. We need to do this at some point, right? Now, this one we're going to call human infrastructure, okay? This has a lot of different stuff. Now, guys, you can do a quick Google search. I looked it up this morning. It's so much stuff that I hesitate to just open that can of worms, but it's a bunch of different stuff. For instance, How many of you guys, any trade academy people? Okay, Mr. Roletter was talking about this, and one of my students brought up second hour, on this, tree equity is part of it. Like $30 billion, because people in the inner cities don't have as many trees. You're gonna spend $30 billion to plant trees in the inner cities. Okay, for tree equity. Okay, this is more of your human side of things. Free junior college paid for throughout the country. Okay, this sort of thing. More of your, this stuff over here. So listen, Nancy Pelosi is going to get a lot of votes from these people here for this. The ones that are not going to vote for it in the Democratic Party are these people. They will not vote for this because they want this. So they're protesting Nancy, saying, we need to pass this one. So they're not going to vote with them. So does Nancy have enough of these to get to a majority vote in the House today? We don't know. That's the politics here. Okay? Now, these people are a big hell no to this, right? And these people are a little hell no to this. Now, over here in the Senate, okay, 50-50, right? You got two Democratic senators, Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Now, West Virginia is one of the reddest states there is, but he's a Democratic senator. You follow me? He likes his job. Now, every time his election rolls around every 6 years, you'll find Joe Manchin in a television commercial hunting with a gun, okay? So he can get those people to vote for him, all right? The other one is, her name is Sienna from Arizona. Both of these two Democratic senators said, look, and Joe Manchin said this in a press conference yesterday. You guys know the Dollar Tree? Okay. The Dollar Tree is no longer going to be the Dollar Tree. It's going to be Dollar Tree Plus. Now listen, inflation is a real thing right now. Your money will buy less than it used to with inflation. Okay? So Dollar Tree is changing its policies. This is one of the fastest growing, retail stores in the country. And people, I don't shop at Dollar. My wife does. My daughter does. But I don't. Okay? But how many of you guys shop at Dollar Tree? Hell yeah, you're poor. Okay? Okay? So, Joe Manchin, listen. Remember when we talked about Keynesian economics in your homework? The idea is to spend, not save, both individual and government to spend. But this spending creates what? Inflation. And we're already having inflation. Joe Manchin, and look, Democrat, Republican, I don't give a crap. It makes sense to me that if you spend this and this, even just this, we're going to see more inflation. And that can have some real negative effects on people and on our country as a whole. Okay? As you guys know, we want a small amount of inflation over time. Too much is bad. Okay? So that's where we're at today in the House of Representatives, in the Senate. Okay? So if they can convince Joe Manchin. Now, what I heard on the radio this morning is Joe Biden's been on the phone talking to members of Congress. Usually presidents will do some arm twisting, try to whip them into shape, convince them to vote with what he wants. This is all part of the Build Back Better thing that Biden has, okay? But he's not really pushing people. From what I understand, he's just listening to their complaints. So I don't know what's going to happen with this one. This one right now is dead. Okay. Now, there's some good things in there probably. Because we have never, ever in the history of the United States passed a bill that big. Now, we are coming out of the pandemic. I guess, right? I don't know. What the next variant, I don't know what it's going to be. You know what I mean? But economically, we do have growth. Okay? So we are not in a recession right now. You understand? We are growing. We spent $5 trillion since last March. Okay? The government had. A lot of COVID spending. Okay? We haven't even spent all that money. So I think the wise among us will figure this out. But this group right here is holding hard to that. That's your progressive wing. And there's about 90 of them in the House.
Where are they mostly from?
The cities,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, all over the country. Yeah, but generally representing larger cities.
I mean, it could be made a lot smaller though, right? Like that tree thing, like it's important, but it's not that important.
Well, if New York City wants trees, why doesn't New York City buy some trees? I mean, do we have to fund that here in Kansas? We need trees too, but we're not in the city. Do we have a complaint here? Is it unfair to us? I mean, it's kind of silly. And there's a lot of silliness in this. I mean, even if you're a liberal, you got to look at this and go,
They have more trees in that park than we do at all.
so, by virtue of the Roosevelt recession and the purge of the Democratic Party, they're going to nominate more liberal members that won't win. So the Republicans will pick up 75 seats in the 1938 election, midterm, in the House and 7 in the Senate. Okay, which is going to make it even harder for Roosevelt to pass the things he wants to pass. Okay, so the last slide I have here is kind of cool. Now, I know it's hard to see, but if you open this up on canvas, you can get a closer look. The red is Republican, the blue is Democrat. Okay, and the House is at the bottom, the Senate is at the top. This goes back to 1855 to 57, just prior to the Civil War. So you can see the Republicans dominate after the Civil War. The Democrats get in there a little bit here and there. Okay? This is what we're talking about here. 1936, the Democrats rule. Okay? Republicans come in for 2 years after the war, right after the war, the 80th Congress. And I will be talking about this Congress because they're going to try and reverse 14 years of Democratic rule in 2 years. Okay? Undo the New Deal, basically. Okay? Then Democrats and Republicans pop in for a little bit, and then 40 years of Democratic rule in the House of Representatives. Okay? And then a little bit back and forth here in the Senate, and you can kind of see. Okay? This is pretty interesting to study. Okay? So yeah. That's what I got. Good? It was kind of an abrupt ending.